You're listening to the fourth series of Behind the Rhymes, The Mountain We All Climbed, with me, Maja.
And me, Andrew. Come with me beyond. Beyond the nuclear wastelands. Beyond the mirrored dome. Beyond the horizon. Beyond the walls of home. Beyond human endurance. Beyond the veil. Beyond pain and suffering. Beyond the ash and hail. Beyond this life. Beyond the past. Approach the bunker's dome. Turn back. Turn the page. Or put down this book and walk on past.
Andrew, this is a poem from the back cover of your new book, Beyond the Bunker. Why Beyond the Bunker? What kind of book is your third book of poetry?
Beyond the Bunker itself was a saying that we picked up whilst we were in Macedonia. It was something that a gentleman that was showing around the village said when we were talking about the way the world was and life was, and on the road out to that village there was a bunker, and he pointed to the bunker, and you translated it because it was in Macedonian, but he basically said, see that bunker up on the road? I don't really care what happens beyond that. And it fitted in quite nicely with a group of poems that I've been writing quite independently, more about the state of the world and why we shouldn't care about what's happening.
So his remark inspired you to compile this book?
So it's certainly where the title came from. I think it was your suggestion to sort of put these poems together because they certainly was a theme. I'd put these poems into 3 separate sort of files that were all going to be 3 different books actually, and we when we realised that was where we were going, we kind of pulled poems from these other 2 books into the third, because they kind of fitted together. The narratives fitted together.
This book is the first one published via Anarchy Publishing, which is our own publishing company. Can you explain why we took this step?
So the first 2 books that we published, which were After the Applause and From the Mountain to the Waterfall, were very good books. We put a lot of time and effort into those, the concepts, the poems. We published them through what's known as a hybrid publisher. And although the standards of that book were quite high when they came out, we were never, I certainly wasn't, 100% happy with some of the processes and the initial length of time that it took. So I think I learned a lot through the editing processes, and so I figured we could give it a go basically.
What did you learn?
The editing is extremely necessary, but not as fun as writing. And I probably spent more time on the editing of this book and the design of the cover and all the interior, how to put it into the right order, than probably I did writing any of those poems that are included in this book. But I certainly see the value of editing, and that's something that I think I took away from the editing that we had via the hybrid publisher.
So given this process, do you have plans for future publishing?
Yes, I don't see any need for us to go back to these hybrid publishers now. I know you disagree, but we essentially, I think I've paid for lessons that I've learned via those companies. It's almost like a tutorial that I've
And
paid
what
for.
Advice would you give to our listeners who perhaps want to publish their own work?
It's not just as easy as writing. Even poetry, if you think that poetry itself, you're not going to make huge changes to that, although there are sometimes grammatical changes that are made. The content basically doesn't change. But if you're writing fiction or non-fiction, that requires quite an extreme amount of editing. It's very time consuming. So you could have a go yourself. I'm a big advocate of writing poetry and writing anything. I've said it many times to other people, and even on this podcast, you don't need to be any kind of literary professor to write anything. It's all from inside. But you could go through one of these hybrid publishers. You could go it on your own. I don't know. I'm not sure if we'd have gone straight into it without going through these hybrid publishers, whether we would have had... Well, I certainly wouldn't have had an understanding of how to put a book together.
And are you prepared to share with listeners who are interested in that process?
Yes, absolutely. I am more than happy to share the ups and downs and the late nights that both you and I have had putting this book together, essentially. And and the things that I've learned, just small things, technical things even, like putting the book into the right format. So, I'll share some of my mistakes. I sent it to a publisher, and I sent it as an A4 document because that's how I write and edit. But of course, that's not how books are printed. This book is not an A4 book. So they sent it back and were saying this is in the wrong format. And then I suddenly realised I hadn't sent it in the format to fit this book. So that's one of multiple errors that I made, which I've learnt from. Even in the past month, I would say, doing that.
What are you working on at the moment as an author?
So currently I am doing two things, I would say. One is that I am putting the final touches into another poetry book, which is called The Metaphorical House, which actually was supposed to be the third book, but I think... And certainly that book was edited to, I would say, almost completion. And then this idea came along, and then we kind of got sidetracked onto this idea. So it's mainly, that book is, for my mind, is complete. It just needs a little bit of finishing. Again, the editing process, formatting. And I'm just in the process of writing It's kind of a hybrid book, actually. It's a book called Memoirs of a Non-War. So it's about my experiences on ICU, some of which I've talked about on the podcast, some of which I haven't, and some of the things that led to the poems that went into the first book. And it's also has some of my own medical-related poems in there, and some of the articles that I wrote and you and I wrote together that we tried to get published in various journals and online journals, which never quite worked out. And then there is also another section in there which includes the poetry of other healthcare workers, which is pandemic related, and that's called Don't Forget Our Voices. So I'm writing that, my part at the moment, and sort of editing it and putting it together at the same time. So there's quite a lot going on at the moment.
So you're going back to the subject that actually made you write initially when you wrote your first book after the applause, the pandemic poetry of a frontline nurse.
Yes, I think, if you think about when we had the first lockdowns, we're now in 2023, and what I found actually is I'd made some notes about that time, but obviously, even though that's recent memory, I was starting to forget things that had happened. So during this process, I wrote a load of notes down, and I started to sort of put chapters together. And then what I realized is the more I wrote, the more I remembered. Certainly some things that I had forgotten, and I think it's time now for me to write that stuff down, basically.
What has prompted this? Is the government inquiry inspiring you? A lot of people want to forget about the pandemic, and yet you seem to be going back to it.
well, a lot of people want to forget the pandemic. Yes, the government quite obviously want to forget the pandemic and all the mistakes that were made and the dodgy deals. But I want to present actually what that is like from our point of view, from a medical professional's point of view. You know, all these PPE deals. When we're wearing insufficient PPE, I want that to be portrayed in another side. As for the COVID inquiry, it's interesting. I've followed it to some extent. The politicians that are being questioned seem to be very lacking in answers and happy to blame their lack of preparedness on other things. I just think it may take some time to write that. I'm hoping that the Metaphorical House can be published this year, because it's further on in completion. The memoirs of the non-war, that may be something that appears next year, because the more I write and the more I go back, the more I remember and the more I think about things. And you know, there are people in my profession that also want to forget. And I understand why. It's still very painful for people. And I look at After the Applause, and I look at this book that I'm putting together at the moment, and maybe it's too soon. Maybe it will be another 10 years before people can look at this stuff and reflect back. Perhaps we're too close, but I don't want anybody to forget really what's been happening, what's happened in the last few years.
Coming back to the new book, Beyond the Bunker, we're starting a new series of podcasts, and we'll have 10 poems that we've chosen to share with our audience before they potentially buy this book. Can you tell us a little bit about the concept and the subjects that are covered in Beyond the Bunker?
Well, I'd like to start with the cover, actually. So the cover, when you see it, is black. It's not black because I can't do cover design, because believe me, I've learned how to do that as well in the last few weeks. It's black because it's a eulogy. It's a funeral color, you know, and this is a eulogy for the world that we live in now, sadly. And that's essentially the concept, is that this is about, some of it's about stating the way things are, and some of it's about how disappointed I am with the way things are, and some of it is about trying to ignore the things that divert us and to try and get on with life. You know, it's called Beyond the Bunker, or how I learned to stop worrying and write poetry. And I actually say it inside the book. I'm still working on the worrying part, or not worrying. And also, as I'm a bit of a film fan, if anybody remembers This Is Spinal Tap, when they had their album, which was a black cover. Obviously, I've not offended anybody like they did in that film, but it was a bit of a homage to that, as indeed the title, the subtitle for this book is borrowed from and acknowledged from Dr. Strangelove, the movie. Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
How do you find your journey has been with this book, from the initial Beyond the Bunker chat to the various stages which I've just talked about?
Well, it's for me, it's still an eye-opener how long it takes from an idea to a book in your hands. So it's been 2 years, I would say, since that discussion with Zoran from the village of Ljubaniste in Macedonia, who mentioned the bunker and used the phrase Beyond the Bunker, which triggered our inspiration, to holding this book and starting this podcast. So even when we don't have to wait for the publisher to publish the book, when we're doing it ourselves, it still takes 2 years from the idea. And you're a prolific writer. You write a lot. So yeah, that's an eye-opener still for me, although we're on the 3rd book now. I enjoy being on the journey. I I'm planning to co-write some books, not poetry, but prose fiction with you. So yeah, I would say to our listeners, if you have an idea and you want to write something, just sit down and write it.
So you just mentioned something which obviously we haven't talked about anywhere other than you and I, is that we have this planned series of a book, which I think has the working title, I think it's The Broken Telescope at the moment, which is about politics and assassination and other things. Did it prompt you, this book and this journey, into that sort of avenue of co-writing that book, or is that something that's been on your mind for a while?
Possibly. You can never tell with inspiration, because obviously Zoran didn't think that out of that comment there would be a book 2 years later.
No,
so this is the thing with inspiration. You just go through life and things come your way and you have all these thoughts, and most of the time, most of us don't put them on paper. So political thrillers, politics is obviously a part of my educational training, a part of my career. I go back to it very frequently. I need a break from it frequently. So it's not, I wouldn't say that it's directly the inspiration that Beyond the Bunker inspired me to think in that direction. Probably more the work of people who have worked on documentaries about the subjects we want to cover. I would say that's definitely inspired me, and also discussions with you, because you're also interested in politics and you know very little about the Balkans, yet your poetry is directly inspired by the Balkans. All 3 books contain inspiration from Macedonia. So I find that very interesting, and I think we mirror each other and we bounce off each other with ideas.
Yes, and you mentioned Zoran, and of course Zoran doesn't even know this book exists. And the first book, that we used the gates of the monastery for, we took back to the curator of the museum and showed him the book, the finished book and the cover. I don't know, maybe we should take Zoran a copy if we can locate him.
Absolutely. I'm sure we'll be able to find him in Ljubanishta doing his work, and we should definitely take him a copy. Tell me, what are the benefits from expressing your talent?
It's quite strange, actually. I mean, I didn't get into this for money or fame, for that matter, which is great because I didn't get either. So there's no disappointment there. But interestingly, there are some huge side benefits which I never really expected. And one is that my elder daughter, who's just finished college course, interviewed me as a segment for her final exam, asking me questions about working on ICU during the pandemic. And my younger daughter, when asked to talk about anything at school, chose me and my books as a source of material for her discussion. And I am very honoured and flattered that my children think that of me. I mean, I am the dad at the end of the day, but they didn't have to choose those things. They didn't have to ask me those questions. So I'm very honoured and flattered. So there are little side things that come along, little tiny side things that just I couldn't possibly even imagine would be the case. And it's sometimes difficult. I sit back and think, this book will be out very shortly, and that's 3 books in 2 years. And it's hard to take that in as an achievement sometimes. I have to say, I do have difficulty taking that on as an achievement. What about you? Have you had any unexpected things that have come via these books?
Well, doing the podcast certainly brings me back to journalism, which is one of my many professions, and I have a degree in journalism, so it's something that I fondly go back to. Our bond, because we treat this as a hobby and we work, as you mentioned, late in the night and at weekends, and we learn things together. So I find it an excellent way to bond with your partner when you have similar interests and you can express yourselves in a similar way. That's a great bonding exercise. Yes, I also didn't expect to get rich by publishing books. I'm just wondering, do you ever expect to earn your money back, the money that you invested in this hobby? Or do you think it's going to be a hobby forever? Or, who is your audience? Who are you addressing with these books?
It's interesting. You and I have had these chats and off mic, obviously, and we have battered forward this idea of a hobby versus a business versus a hobby versus a business. I think at the minute the dial is set on hobby, which I'm happy with. It doesn't give me any pressure. You and I have difference of opinion on this. I never expected to make money from this endeavour, and if we make our money back, I would be surprised as well. So it was never about that from my side, I would say. It was more about having a voice and wanting it to be heard, basically. And I'm not sure who the audience for this stuff is, apart from my children and the people who listen to this podcast. And they listen to this podcast in different countries around the world, from what I can see from the analytics that come from Spotify.
Where do you have listeners? Where do we have listeners from?
I think in New Zealand, there's in Australia, and obviously Europe as well. So I don't know. I mean, even one listener in America. I mean, that's one listener in America that I've never met. But 2-3 years ago, did I have a podcast? Was I speaking to anybody? Was I addressing anybody? So yeah, I guess you're right. The podcast itself, although we used it as a vehicle to promote the books, maybe has become something else. It's certainly something that I enjoy, and I know you enjoy doing. I was never a journalist, but perhaps I don't get tired of listening to my own voice. I don't know.
Your book After the Applause was quoted in the British
Journal of Nursing. Yeah.
Journal of Nursing. So that's something unexpected that came out from publishing it.
Yeah. So that's that came from a performance and at the Word and Water in London last July, which is one of only 2 times I've actually ever performed. There will be other ones this year, I think, the way things are going. But somebody at that performance listened, and when we did the Q&A at the end, when somebody said, why aren't you telling people this is the way it is? There's some newspaper companies over there. I was saying to them, I've tried and no one's interested. And obviously somebody was listening and somebody was interested and somebody wrote an article about it where my book is referenced, and I'm very honoured and flattered.
Well, I think this episode is an introduction to what's coming in Beyond the Bunker. Would you like to read the back cover poem again for our listeners?
Come with me beyond. Beyond the nuclear wasteland, beyond the mirrored dome, beyond the horizon, beyond the walls of home, beyond human endurance, beyond the veil, beyond pain and suffering, beyond the ash and hail, beyond this life, beyond the past, approach the bunker's dome, turn back, turn the page, or put this book down and walk on past.
You've been listening to Behind the Rhymes, the mountain we all climb, with me, Maja.
And me, Andrew. You can find all the poems from this series in my new book, Beyond the Bunker, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Write Poetry.
The book is produced by our publishing company, Anarchy. And if you want to order it, contact us at vonperestproductions@outlook.com.
Where you can also contact us about other things, maybe even including a chat about the state of the world.